And now I'd like to introduce David Snowpack from MyDropWizard.com.
Hi, I'm David Snowpack from MyDropWizard. We do support and maintenance for Drupal 6, 7, and 8 sites. We also provide white label support and maintenance to Drupal shops, agencies, freelancers. So you can sell support and maintenance plans to your customers, and then we can act as your support department. So you can focus on building new sites and new features without having to drop everything when there's a security release or a customer has a problem. We'll take care of that for you. So it's my pleasure to introduce your keynote for today, Todd Neinkirk of 4Kitchens. In case you don't know Todd, I have 3 facts to get you up to speed. Fact number 1, Todd used to be a comedy writer, leading to fact number 2, that 4Kitchens apparently started out as you guys were maintaining the site for
We started a local humor publication and had to build a Drupal site for it.
So the Drupal site for local humor publications where 4Kitchens grew out of. And fact number 3, Todd is a 2-time finalist for the best CEO in Austin. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Todd Neinkirk.
Good morning, everybody. So pardon me while I do the little switcheroo here. All right. So today we're going to talk about creating a culture of empowerment, what it is, why it matters, and how it will improve your life and business. My name is Todd Neinkirk. I am CEO and co-founder of 4Kitchens. That's my email address if you want to get a hold of me later. That's my Twitter handle. Warning, a lot of the stuff on Twitter is just like bad puns and stupid jokes like the following. You might not know who I am, but I'm big in Iowa. So before we get started, you're going to hear me talk a lot about the way we do things at 4Kitchens, and that's not bragging. That's because we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've learned from them, and we continue to make mistakes and learn from them. And I'm also very interested to hear about the mistakes you have made and the successes you have had and how we can learn from one another in being part of a team or leading a team. My opinions are largely based on my experience working in the web industry in the United States. You'll understand why I specifically highlight that cultural touchstone, because this is all about culture, so it's kind of limited to my view within those experiences. And finally, I want to say that this is a really unusual talk for a Drupal camp. It's not about Drupal, it's not about the web, it's not about technology, it's about people and how we communicate. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak about a topic that often doesn't get covered in events like this. So I'm here today because I want to help people run better companies by making teams and leaders happier. And that's people on the team and the leaders of those teams, both. We're going to get into some really specific, tactical, practical advice on what you can do within your team or organization. But first, I'd like to know how many of you are business owners? All right. Leaders or managers within your organization in some capacity? All right. And people who have to report to some kind of leader or, yes? Okay. So this is for all of you, I promise. I want to start with a story from one of the first jobs that I ever had in the tech industry. I was right out of high school, in between high school and college, kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. This was the summer of 2000, right when the bubble burst. And I was working for a startup called Cyber Expo. You've never heard of it, it doesn't matter. Cyber Expo was a company that, and this is going to sound silly now, installed giant free internet kiosks in large shopping malls all over the country. Why would you ever need that now? Because we don't have the internet in our pocket, right? But back then, that was a pretty big deal. So they had all of this infrastructure that they had to haul around the country. Big metal circular displays with plasma screen TVs that were super, super expensive and heavy, and these super durable keyboards where a kid could walk through with a Slurpee and dump it on there and it'd still work. So they had to build all this physical infrastructure. But they also had to have some software infrastructure. My job was to stay up all night and upload ads that appeared on the plasma screens above the internet terminals. That was my job. So this place had the trappings of, like, you think about something like that, how can I ever make money? Don't worry, it didn't. It was all funded, right? So, like any other startup, like we're seeing today, because, things go in these 10 to 15-year cycles, we're saying this again, there's just a lot of money being thrown at this idea. Because, like, everybody needs the internet. Who wouldn't want to chat with a friend or check their email in the middle of the shopping experience? Which we do all the time, yeah, of course. So I guess they were ahead in that way. Regardless, about halfway through that summer, it became pretty obvious that like things weren't really going as well as they had hoped, and we were seeing all these other startups failing, like Pets.com and all of that. So one day we got an email, company-wide email, that said, effective immediately, you can only have 2 snacks from the break room per day. So there's this break room, right? And there's like a ping pong table. There's always a ping pong table. They had all these snacks, and these are those little, like the little bags of snacks, not like, the 89-cent 7-Eleven, but these are the 39-cent Costco, Sam's Club bulk, right? These tiny little bags. So what did we all start doing, like mentally, after we got this email, right? We started thinking about how much do these snacks cost exactly? Because everybody's thinking that, right? So let's assume they're 50 cents. Let's be generous and say that these snacks cost 50 cents a bag. Okay, so that's $1 a day. That's $5 a week. That's about $5,000 a year for 20 employees. Is that going to save anybody's job at $5,000 a year? No. So we all do this math and we're thinking like, wow, if they have to cut that much, like where do I stand? What's going to happen to me, right? So these are the obvious things that we start to think about. But there's something more subtle in this communication that was really troubling. Because of course you do the math. When you create a rule, what do you have to do? Enforce it. Okay. Who is going to enforce this rule? Any ideas? CEO. All right. Yes, sir? Each other. Okay. Maybe an office manager, maybe the purchasing person, right? You can't have a rule and not enforce it. So then, okay, is the CEO going to start sitting in the break room and doling out 2 snacks a day with a checklist? Who makes the checklist, right? Is it on the honor system? Do we police each other? John had 3 snacks yesterday. We're going to go business, right? And then of course, there's this third, even more subtle thing that happens. And that is, well, now we're on this like system, and this is a benefit, and I want to take advantage of the benefit. So now I'm definitely going to take 2 snacks a day. And if I don't take 2 snacks today, I'll take 4 snacks tomorrow. Is that allowed? Do we have rollover snacks? Right? So all of these things start swirling around the company, and it creates all these questions and this logistical nightmare, and suddenly questions are pouring into HR about like, well, what about rollover snacks, and who's going to enforce this, and what's going on, and like who's going to, right? So what should they have done instead? Any ideas? Got rid of snacks entirely. You can't afford snacks anymore. Okay. It was a half measure, right? They created, it's very easy having something like that, a rule like that imposed on you, and to talk about how stupid it is, right? It's really easy to do that. But let's for a moment now put ourselves in the shoes of leadership. Leadership wanted to keep providing snacks for people. They didn't want to take them away entirely, because they're like, well, we're just going to have to cut back. We don't have to get rid of them entirely. Let's not do that. We're just going to cut back. Like, what's a good middle ground? Let's just say 2 snacks a day, right? They're actually trying to be nice and helpful and to provide a benefit. But because it was this half measure, and because it really it created this moment of doubt in the culture, and it begged all these other questions, and it made people then want to game the system and take advantage of this benefit that before was just sort of, whatever, I'll take a snack if I want it, if I don't, I won't, right? It had this unintended consequence of really eroding morale. So I talked about culture and how this eroded some of the morale and some of how the culture of that organization was that they wanted to provide this benefit, but they took this half measure and they revoked it partially, and then it kind of all spun out of control. And lots of other things happened too, but that was just the kind of the most like visceral example of a tiny thing that they tried to change. So what do we mean when we say culture? We talk about company culture a lot, right? Like the culture of this team, the culture of that organization. They have a toxic culture. They have a great culture, right? So our modern dictionary, dictionary.com, defines culture as the behaviors and beliefs characteristic of a social, ethnic, or age group. So what are some of these social groups that we're talking about here? There might be clubs that you're a part of, the friends you hang out with, your family, but we spend about a third of our lives at work. So work is a social group. We spend a lot of time with one another in a work context. So your organization is a social group. Americans work on average, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 8.7 hours per day, 5 days a week, most weeks out of the year. I'd like you to think, though, about culture more from the inside and outside simultaneously. How that culture affects how you think and feel about a group. Outward, looking in, and inward about yourself. It's about how you think and feel about yourselves or another group. So I want to run a little experiment with you right now. I'm going to show you some images that are related to the United States. And I want you to think about just take note of your emotional and cognitive reactions to the following images. Okay? Here we go. How did those images make you feel? What were some emotions that you felt going through that slide? Proud. Proud? Patriotic? Any others? Angry?
Sad.
Sad?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed? Annoyed? How many of you who answered are United States citizens? Right? We're all United States citizens. We all speak English. We're all in this conference room together. We're all Drupal users or developers or designers, right? We're a pretty narrow subset of the population, but we have a very diverse set of reactions about those images, right? So it's really hard to say that there's any one American culture. The point is that none of us, even within this room, have one idea of what the United States is, and that's because culture has many layers that influence how we feel about an organization or a group. So let's talk about some of those. First, there's the universal human culture. And there's actually some stuff that ties us all together as a species. There's the obvious biological stuff, but also anthropologists, social scientists, psychologists, and others have observed, for example, that there are a standard set of facial expressions that convey emotion. A smile means you're happy, a frown means you're sad. And that's across really any culture, including many peoples who have had very limited contact or really no contact at all with the modern world. There's also language, and we're going to come back to language later, but language is deeply, deeply, deeply profound. Language is really about how we communicate and we reason. So you go from one part of the United States to another. You go from New York to Minnesota. People say different words. They might think a little bit differently. They have different turns of phrase. They have different attitudes. But we're all actually kind of speaking slightly different languages. And language deeply influences our culture in that way for reasons that I'll also touch on a bit later. We have a national culture. So the United States is different from Canada, right? We're next to each other. We share a lot culturally. But in Canada, universal healthcare is a cultural value. Here, it is not. And that's a very distinct thing, and it influences a lot and reflects a lot about those cultures. We also have local culture. So I'm from Austin. There are certain cultural norms in Austin that are different from the cultural norms in the rest of Texas, or certain areas of Texas. Different customs, the way people talk, the way people think about things. And then finally, there's the culture of the self. We bring all of our own personal experiences, familial experiences, ancestral experiences to bear when we interact with any organization or other person. So all of these layers, and there are many more too, but these are some pretty big distinct ones. All of these make up culture. So that's the first thing that I want to define here. In a culture of empowerment, what is culture? This is what I mean. So what do I mean by empowerment? Again, our moderndictionary.com. Empowerment is the giving or delegation of power or authority. So that's what's being given, power or authority to do something or to be something. But what's being received? What does it mean to be empowered? It's four things. First, the autonomy to decide what you will do and how you will do it. Being able to plan your day and decide how you're going to achieve that goal or task, right? Two, the freedom to challenge without fear of reprisal. Being able to share your thoughts and feelings without being shot down. Being able to speak your mind without being told that's a stupid idea, or you're not in charge of that, or that's somebody else's department, right? Three, you actually have to have the power to affect change. You need the ability to actually do something about whatever it is you're trying to solve. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, you have to actually own the outcome. If you're not responsible for the outcome of your decisions and actions and the way you want to do things, then you're not really fully empowered. So to sum it all up, empowerment means controlling your own destiny. Autonomy to decide what you will do and how you will do it. Freedom to challenge without fear of reprisal. The power to effect change, and the ownership of outcomes. I'm a big believer in understanding the why before we get to the what. So I want to talk about, like, okay, who cares, right? We're here to talk about culture of empowerment. I'm saying it matters and it's important. Let me explain why I feel that it matters, and especially in a business context. So there are three things. Empowerment makes teams happy. When a team is empowered to do stuff, it makes people more productive, it increases quality, it increases retention at your organization. When people feel like they have destiny over the work that they're doing, they're happier. It's just a human trait. People want to have control over their day, and they want to have control over what they're doing. Empowerment makes your clients or stakeholders happy. A happy team, going back to the first item, is enthusiastic about the work, and that absolutely carries over to the client or stakeholder relationship. They bring those experiences internally to the outside world, to the client-facing world. So if they're enthusiastic about the work, the client's going to pick up on that. They're going to be happier. They're going to enjoy working with the team, right? They see it, hear it, feel it on your Scrum calls or your demos or in the tone of the emails or anything. Like, it just oozes out of your organization. And more importantly, an empowered team has the ability to solve the client's problems. There was some retail store years ago that gave authority to absolutely anybody, cashiers, janitorial staff, anybody, and they give them these little buttons that say, like, ask me how I can help. And that person had the ability to do pretty much anything necessary to help the customer in a short-term, retail context. And customer service just went through the roof of that organization, because now there wasn't this excuse of, like, yeah, you're gonna have to talk to my manager about that, right? Everybody hates here, that sucks, right? That's so annoying. Or like, I'm a tier 1 or tier 3 tech support, I need tier 1, right? And they're just like, oh, I don't know how to do that, let me put in a request, like, oh no, right? Like that. Imagine being your client or stakeholder and hearing that kind of thing. You as a customer in an everyday context, you hate that stuff, right? So you want to be working with empowered people who can actually fix things for you. And finally, empowerment enables leadership to focus on the right stuff. So there's a, in the past, we've been doing this whole website thing, the internet, it's that. We've been doing this for 10 years. And one of the things, like early on within Four Kitchens, that I had to learn, it was a really hard lesson for me, was being able to really empower other people on the team so that I could focus on, like, longer term stuff, like going out and getting more clients or growing the organization or whatever. And the thing that felt like I was always being held back on was I was getting a lot of questions all the time, like, just how do I do this? What's up with this? Where do we keep this documentation? What's going on here? Right? Just peppered all day long with all these little questions. And then I heard this story about a company back in the day called CB Baby. Does anybody remember this organization? Okay, great. So CB Baby was this was like in the mp3.com days where people were doing self-publishing for music and spoken word. CD Baby was an organization that would print CDs for you or burn CDs for you in bulk and then mail them to you or people who ordered them. So you could like upload MP3s and sell your music or comedy album or whatever that way. So small organization, basically run out of a garage, run out of some guy's house, 5 or 6 person team. And this guy talked about how every day he would try to sit down and like work on some kind of a marketing plan, and somebody come up to him and say, "Hey, I just got this email from a customer. They ordered 3 copies and only got 2, and like now he wants to mail them back. And like, I don't know, what am I supposed to do, right?" It's like, well, just send them a 3rd one or give them a refund or whatever, right? He'd get these questions constantly. And then he had a really good idea. And the idea was, next time somebody asks me a question, I'm going to gather the whole team. I'm going to ask that person to restate the question. And then I'm going to explain how to solve the problem. I will explain the philosophy underlying why I reached that conclusion. Then I'm going to point at somebody and say, write that down. And then I'm going to point at everybody and say, now everybody here can make that decision from this point forward. You never have to ask me that again. 2 days later, nobody's asking the questions. That's empowerment enabling leadership. So let's get to the practical. How do you actually do this stuff? How do you empower your team? And how do you as a team member become empowered? How can you influence all aspects of the organization? I talked about the importance of language earlier, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. So there's this sort of common sense approach to language in which language is an expression of your thought. Like you have a thought in your head, and the way to express that thought is to say it through language to somebody else so that they also have that thought, or that they understand where you're coming from. And this is how neurologists and psychologists and linguists have thought about language for years and years and years. But some really recent science has shown that communication doesn't start with a thought and get translated into language. It's that language is the thought. And if you don't possess language, you don't possess thought. So language creates the structure in your brain that allows you to build thoughts that you can then communicate using that same language. And this is a really profound term. They found this out because they've been working with people who, due to developmental reasons or who knows, were not really exposed to language early on in their lives and had to learn much later. And they asked these people after years and years and years of therapy and teaching and learning, what was life like before you had language? And they just don't remember. They don't have the structure to create the emotional and cognitive memories that would even explain what life was like back then. So language isn't just a way that we express a thought or emotion. It is the thought and emotion. And therefore, language is a direct connection to the way somebody thinks. So therefore, it's we, not I. It is team or colleagues or coworkers, not employees. Because I represents, I'm the only one who can solve this. Employees presents a power dynamic that has a lot of emotional baggage associated with it. You want to emphasize that we are all in this together, right? And you begin it with language. It's kind of like that TED Talk. I forget her name. There's one who has this very popular TED Talk about adopting a power stance prior to a meeting. You do that for 2 minutes, and then you're much more confident. Very similar kind of thing. You make this tiny change. You do a power stance for 2 minutes. You make this tiny change to your language that can drastically affect how you think and how people are perceiving what you're saying. And it actually rewires your brain. It's making actual physical connections in your brain and other people's brains to get people to think differently. So it starts with language. Start with never saying I, never saying the E word, employees. You have to ask for input every single day. People want to be heard more than they want to be agreed with. One more time. People want to be heard more than they want to be agreed with. Somebody getting something off their chest or just knowing that somebody heard them and really listened Maybe they couldn't do anything about it, maybe they didn't do anything about it, but at least they heard and understood. That's the most important thing. So you have to create those opportunities for people to be heard. A lot of people have open door policies. Who has an open door policy at work? Right? Everybody. My door's always open. Now, that's not cynical. Like, I'm sure they really do mean it. I really do mean it when I say it. But the thing is, it's one thing to say the door is open, go in anytime, and it's another to be standing on the other side of that door and saying, come on in. Right? So you have to actually set aside time to have these conversations and make it deliberate and have it be known in advance, right? Maybe it's a half-hour check-in every week or two. Finally, in those check-ins and in those conversations, you have to ask questions that demand real answers. So it's very easy to say, hey, it's been a couple of weeks since we last talked. How you doing? I'm fine. How's work? It's great. Right? We've all done that. How are you? I'm great. And then we get kind of annoyed and you're like, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, bad. And you're like, I don't like it. Well, just say everything's fine and we'll finish our transaction. But you have to ask questions that make people think, that provide more feedback than a simple conversational dance that we all do every day. So, for example, what's the thing you're most proud of in the last 2 weeks? People have to stop and really think about that. They have to think about everything they've done, filter through it, identify something or nothing. What's stressing you out most right now? What's something you want to get done by the end of the week or the end of the year? Things that really cause people to think, because then, let's say we have a conversation. How are things going? They're great. How's work? Great. What are you most stressed out about? Oh, where do I begin? Right? So obviously something is weighing on it. And this relates directly to creating feedback channels that are accessible, non-argumentative, and genuine. So, accessible. People have to actually be able to get a hold of you at a predictable time. If you have a check-in that is maybe just over phone, that's not terribly accessible because somebody might not have good service or they don't really get to see you, or if you keep moving that check-in around constantly, like that's not very accessible. Non-argumentative, you need to be there just to listen, not to fight with the person about it, right? Like, they may be misinformed or they may misunderstand, but their experience is real in that moment, and don't fight them about it. And 3, genuine. You have to actually really mean it. This can't just be I'm checking off a box like on my HR thing, right? You have to actually want to talk to them and want to make some changes. So the example that I like to use here is the Toyota assembly line. Who here has heard the story of the Andon cord? Okay. So Ford, the Ford assembly line, back in the day, I think that a lot of this has changed. The goal of the Ford assembly line was get stuff out the door, never stop. It doesn't matter what's happening, any flaw, get it out there, get it out there, get it out there, right? Never stop the assembly line. If you stop the assembly line, these big alarms go off and red flashing lights, and the managers are immediately thinking like, I'm losing $1 million a minute, like what's going on, right? So it resulted in this workflow where somebody might notice there's a bad weld and not say anything. Or they notice there's bad weld and they just put a note on the car and they're like, yeah, this has a bad weld wherever. Well, it's still going down the assembly line. So what happens? They put the doors on, they put the windows in, they put in the interior paneling, they do all this stuff, and that car goes out to, and no kidding, there's a giant lot that's like the something's broken in this car lot, right? And there's a note on there that says there's this weld way down deep. Now they have to disassemble the whole car and find the weld and reassemble it. Guess what? They're never going to do it, or they're going to do a poor job, or who knows. So instead, Toyota is a wise company. They changed their approach, and they installed what they call the Andon cord, which is this long cable that runs the entire length of the assembly line that everybody is encouraged to pull whenever they see a problem. And when they pull it, there's a delightful little chime that plays, and a manager comes over and says, thank you for pulling the cord, how can I help? That's a very different experience, right? Higher quality, the weld gets fixed, the assembly line worker is praised for having noticed that there's a problem. So the feedback channel is accessible, it's within arm's reach at all times. It is non-argumentative, nobody's No giant siren and red flashing lights. Or why'd you pull the cord, right? Non-argumentative and genuine. How can I help? Let's fix this together. You have to own your mistakes. So whether you're a team member or a leader, be the first to own your mistakes. This builds trust because it shows vulnerability. And we should all be vulnerable. You can't actually empower someone until you trust them, and they won't act on that empowerment until they trust you to let them succeed or fail. You have to let people fail. And to do that, you have to show them that it's okay to fail by owning your own mistakes. So admit failure, solve, don't blame. You have to hire the right people. So you have to share values. There's a thing that I used to talk about, and I wrote a few blog posts about this, and in fact, I got quoted. I had the weird opportunity to be quoted in, I think it was the Harvard Business Review, and they asked us about recruiting practices. And so I talked about this thing called the airport test. And I picked up that term. It wasn't a thing that we invented at all. I picked up the term from Greg Madison, Greggles, you may know him, Drupal guy. He had this philosophy of the airport test that I adopted. And the airport test was, when you're interviewing somebody, think about being stuck in an airport with them for 8 hours. What does that feel like, right? Does that feel like, ugh? Or is it like, yeah, I can kind of, that's a crappy situation, but, we could, I could get along with this person for 8 hours in the airport, that's cool. So I was kind of proud of this because I felt like that was sort of tapping into what we were trying to get at with hiring practices. And then the article went up, and then I was really proud of that. And then I made the mistake of reading the internet comments. And the very first comment said, airport test sounds like a great excuse for exclusionary hiring practices. And that cut deep. They were right. They were right. So we don't do the airport test anymore. It is now a values test. What is it that you value? Therefore, you have to define your values in order to have the rubric that you grade against. So as an organization, you have to think about what is it that you value. For example, for Kitchens, we value collaboration. Is this a person who really embodies the value of collaboration? Or is this somebody that really likes to take a lot of credit and wants to be like, JavaScript rockstar or whatever, right? One of those things. Like, we need somebody who's a team player, who can collaborate, who can work with clients, who isn't gonna have a big ego, right? Those are the values that we're going for. Be humble, communicate well. These are the things that we value at Kitchens. So by hiring the right people, don't airport test it. It doesn't matter if you get along with them, because who do we get along with? We get along with the people most like us. And let's look really deeply into what that means, honestly, right? Political beliefs, religious beliefs, orientation, race, age, ethnicity, right? It really does touch on all those things. So, no airport test, values test. Strongly consider becoming a distributed team and going virtual. Now, this one definitely will not work for everybody in the room. I know that. But think about maybe a hybrid approach. Going virtual allows people an enormous amount of flexibility and empowerment, because now they get to live where they want to live, be with their family where their family needs to be, or their partner or whoever, anywhere in the world, so long as they can make that relationship with you as the organization work. That's tremendously empowering to have the freedom to decide, I don't want to live in Iowa anymore, I want to live in Minnesota, I want to live in California, right? And now I don't have to worry about switching jobs. That's really, really powerful. And you can do hybrid approaches too, and that's a whole separate talk that we could get into sometime, but definitely worth considering. And closely related to that is letting your team, or demanding that you as a team member, set your own schedule. Maybe have flexible work schedules like a 4-10, meaning 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, and you have Monday, Friday, whatever day you want off. It means perhaps an open vacation policy. Open vacation means you take however much time you need off whenever you need it, so long as it doesn't unnecessarily encumber the rest of your teammates. So a lot of people then say, they think about something like that, because Netflix famously has this kind of policy. Well, then in that case, couldn't somebody just like join the organization and just say, I'm on vacation, I have to pay them? No, you don't have to pay them, you fire them, right? Because they're not upholding the values of your organization. The value isn't to slack off and get paid for doing nothing and whatever. The value is that they need to be helping the team and doing good work and helping your stakeholders and clients and all of that. If people abuse these policies, they aren't the right people. They're not right for the team. They're just in it for the ride. Get rid of them. You know, nicely, but it just didn't work out. You have to invest time and money in your team's success. Professional development budgets, time off to do these things. We offer a $2,000 annual professional development budget. Plus, if anybody speaks at events or trains at events, those expenses are covered, period, and does not eat into professional development. Also, that's a marketing move. We'll talk about that later, too. This is one of my favorites, and it really freaks some people out. Encourage personal brands. So having really amazing, famous, skilled, well-known people on your team helps your team, right? As long as they don't have an ego about it, it helps your team. A lot of people, I've heard, countless business owners say things like, if this person gets too good, they're gonna leave. Well, what's wrong with you such that they would want to leave, or alternatively, good. Everybody grows, everybody decides they want to do new things, they find new skills, they decide they want a different job. Great. Do you really want to what is this person saying? Are they saying they want to deliberately suppress that person's skill level and enthusiasm to make them think that this is the only job they can ever have? That's really what they're saying when they don't agree to something like this. That's not cool at all, right? So encourage those people who want to do it, and not everybody wants to do that, and that's fine. Encourage those people to speak or write or make videos or get really good at something. And you know what? They might leave. In fact, statistically, they probably will. But they will leave in a way knowing that you empowered them to do this. And they will leave with a sense that if it weren't for that job and that experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. As opposed to the narrative of, I had to get out of there in order to become what I am today. Consider adopting agile methodologies. This allows teams to self-organize around problems. So agile project management, there are all kinds of design philosophies around this. The idea is pick something that allows people to self-organize and collaborate because that empowers them. Simply say, this is the goal we need to hit. This is the problem we need to solve. Go solve it. Don't tell them how to solve it, right? Let them organize around the problem. This facilitates empowerment. Likewise, don't tell people how to do things. Set a goal, provide them the right tools and space and whatever to make that happen, but don't give them a step-by-step, unless you're training them, don't give them a step-by-step, here's how to do something. Give them the goal, see if they succeed, allow them space to fail, and if they continually fail, they're not right for the team or organization, or find something else for them to do. You also need to challenge people. So you have to set boundaries beyond somebody's current expectations or how they feel. You have to really kind of push people to say, like, you really are capable of doing this. Like, I know you can totally do this. And if you fail, it's okay. Like, here are the boundaries in which failure is okay. There are some forms of failure that are really not okay, like deliberately sabotaging their college or something like that. But allow them space to really stretch, and they will almost always surprise you. And you will always almost surprise yourself as well. Accept that your team knows more about the work than you do. This perhaps applies more to management and leadership, but these are the people actually doing the work. You're not doing the work anymore. They know what's going on better than you do. And this goes back to hiring the right people, right? Always hire people smarter and better than you. And if that intimidates you, look deeply into yourself to try to understand why that freaks you out, right? Because hiring smarter and better people means the end product is going to be smarter and better, and you get to focus on whatever it is that you do that's better than what they do. And finally, you have to constantly exemplify, pursue, and praise empowerment. You have to enforce it. You have to recognize it, call it out, whether it succeeds or fails, and celebrate it. Celebrate successes, celebrate failures. Learn from them. And make sure that people understand that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of empowerment that they feel they have the ability to ask for help and not be seen as incompetent or stupid. So I want to close with the guiding principles of empowerment and tie them back a little bit to open source, because that's really where all of this stuff came from. We're a company that has specialized in working in open source and has been an active member of the open source community, and Drupal in particular, for 10 years. All of these ideas really are drawn from those experiences, working in these communities. So give people control over their own destiny, like in open source software. Let people do with that software what they need. Let them decide their own path. Treat your coworkers as responsible professionals. They are adults that you collaborate with. They are not children that you have to oversee. In the knowledge industry, design, development, software, things that are creative, things that are technical, people are generally very self-motivated. So if you're self-motivated, you're self-directed, and you can gain so much from that. And if you put boxes around that, it really frustrates them. I mean, we've all been in jobs where it's like, if they would just let me switch to this platform, if they would just let me adopt this continuous integration system, right, things would be so much better. Make trust the center of your culture. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Be transparent, own your mistakes, be vulnerable. That's how you create trust. We do the same thing in the open source community. And build a company or an open source project that you would want to work for. So when you start to lead a project or a team, or even if it's just one other person that you're helping lead through onboarding or something, think about what it would mean to work for yourself. So for those of you who are leaders and managers, just for a moment, take a moment to think about cloning yourself, standing in front of yourself, and having to work for that person. What does that feel like? Not always good, right? So you have to think about, like, why did you start a business, or why did you go into management, or why did you decide to lead this initiative or team or whatever? And it's because most people wanted to be empowered, and so they sought that out. They saw an opportunity for doing something better or different, and they actively sought it out and wanted to make a change. And how many people here who have started a business in the past did so because they're like, man, these people are crazy. Like, I know how to do this. I'm out of here. I have a good idea, right? Like, this is a reason why people leave. So I had a really personal experience with something like this. Earlier, I was making fun of this company, CyberExpo, and their two-step policy, right? Now, they were actually a really good company. They had really good people. They were really values-driven. They made this silly mistake in a moment of panic with finances, with the snacks, right? But fundamentally, they had strong values. And I know this because later that summer, I learned that my mother was terminally ill. And that was probably going to be the last month that I could ever spend with her. And I told them, like, I'm going to, I might have to run up to the hospital and all this stuff. I'm 18 years old. They say, don't worry about it. Take the rest of the summer off. We'll pay you for that month. Good luck in school. We want you to spend this time with your mom. I had no idea that a company could do something like that, right? But the thing is, we could all do something like that. There are moments that we have that we can, make a big difference in somebody's life. And that wasn't a ton of money to them. I mean, they were worried about money at the time. They were cutting out snacks, and they were going to pay me for 4 weeks off. Like, I'd only been there 2 months. That's incredible. That's awesome. But that stuck with me for the rest of my life until this very day. And thinking about, like, wanting to pay that forward to everybody that I work with. That's what it means to build a company that you would want to work for. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Or just thoughts and reactions? Oh, sorry? Andy.
Yeah, there's an organization I used to be part of that doesn't not trust as its central goal. Do you have any advice on entering into a situation like that?
Yeah. So for those of you who may not have heard the question, how do you repair an organization where trust is not at the center? There is no one way to fix it, right? It's not like, oh, you just hit the trust button, right? I'm not being flippant, but there's not like one single cause. It's always a system. There are definitely going to be bad actors involved in something like that, and to some extent you can try to address that or understand why they're behaving that way, and sometimes that's a one-on-one thing, and sometimes that you might have to be a little more heavy-handed. Sometimes you might just have to lead some people out because they're not right for the culture that you want to create. And really what you're getting at is like, how do you create that culture of trust? Like, how do you create a culture of empowerment? So you have to make sure that you have the right people. And in some cases that might be the right people in the wrong position or just the wrong people entirely. You have to model behavior. That's like the number one thing. So be the organization you want to be. Be the person you want to be. Just do it, just start, right? And it's harder for somebody joining a team who is not really in any kind of leadership position to influence that change. And it might actually be impossible, depending on how big the organization is or like how deep the problems go. But having really like open, transparent, potentially vulnerable conversations with your supervisors or managers about how you feel about certain things within the organization, but also bringing potential solutions to the table in the same conversation is really useful, because I'm sure that those people feel the same way. Or maybe they just sort of take it for granted and they're like, I'm going to live with it. But then somebody comes along, some new person comes along and they're like, I want to fix this stuff. Like, they might get excited about that too, right? And so if you show up with some good ideas about like, I think that there's this one person, a coworker who, there's a certain way that they communicate when they get upset that is really blaming. And here are some potential solutions for something like that. Like maybe we put in place, a certain style of commenting on code commits that like really forces people to take accountability for the work that they do, right? That's kind of like, I'm almost literally using like get blamed, right, in this case. But there are like lots of little tiny things that you can do in your day-to-day, and especially around modeling behavior. Like, be the person that you would want everybody else to be. I find that that's usually the most helpful way to do it. But usually, like, there are going to be a dozen or 24 different things that are eroding away at that.
There's an analogy that's useful for a lot of negative situations for groups of people, and that's a pile of charcoal. If you've ever tried to light one briquette, it's really hard to do. It won't sustain itself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you get a pile of briquettes together and light those, you cook supper, and they reinforce each other with the heat and everything else. So if you can spread those coals out, in other words, if somebody's having a bad day, or you've got a group of people who are clustered together and they're reflecting negative stuff at each other all day long, whether organizationally or physically, you can isolate those people a little farther from each other. That reflection, that reinforcement will halt. And a lot of those small flames will burn themselves out on their own. Now, how you actually go about doing that is difficult. There's the difficulty. As a person in in organizations who have had those problems, myself, I will isolate myself from bad actors, because I do reflect those people around me, and then I in turn, spread it out. So by isolating myself in those situations from bad communications, from a lot of negative stuff, I don't become one of the sources of heat in the problem. What is the problem? Sometimes somebody's just unhappy. So yeah, there's the issue of what's the source of the problem. Is it a bad actor that the organization needs to get rid of, or something else? This doesn't address the source of the problem. This is a way of mitigating an existing problem. So,
related to that, something that I try to catch myself doing, this can be a little bit easier when you have a distributed team and people are working remotely, because if you're having a bad day, you can just kind of be like, I'm just not going to do a lot of like video chats today. I'm just right. Like, I'm just going to deal with whatever. And especially if you're in a leadership position, people are constantly reading into everything that you do. It's not nefarious. They're just they're looking at somebody and they're like, huh, like, seems like this person's having a bad day today. And I wonder what that means. You know, and they start to, then you start to ruminate on that. And
Is it me?
yeah, is it me? Is it a problem? Is it like, was it really bad news, or what's going on? So, and I think that Angie, probably with all your work with the Drupal 8 initiative and Drupal 7 and everything, there are days when it's just like, nope. Like if I get on another phone call, they're going to hear that I'm mad and I'm frustrated and like just forget about it. Like I need to take the rest of the afternoon off and not interact, and just kind of like deal with myself and deal with the things that I need to do. So I find that can be helpful as well. Because if we were all walking around the office together, like if somebody saw me like skulking around, like getting my coffee and bad myself, then, which I do, like that's not healthy. That's not good for other people to see.
But anything taken to an extreme can go wrong. One of the famous, I don't know, maybe well known, maybe not, is in the trucking industry. You've got truck drivers who are isolated for days at a time. They don't have communication back with the central office. They don't have community with their peers. And a lot of these guys will sit and get a crazy idea, or they'll get one little gripe, and it'll feed on itself and feed on itself and feed on itself. And by the time they get back to the office, they're raving about a missing penny off their paycheck and how it's a big conspiracy and this, that, and the other. And this isn't just isolated to this group of people. This can happen in distributed teams. So keeping lines of communication open on a regular basis will alleviate that.
Very true. You had, sorry.
You touched on doing the 17 professional development side of things as both kind of marketing side and personal brands.
Yeah.
That makes total sense for a corporation or kind of marketing needs to get both there.
Mm-hmm.
For a corporation or an academic setting, what would the argument be to do that beyond professional development? Is there an argument to be made for the organization?
I would say it has to do with, it would be kind of like a combination of bragging rights and like social stance between your peer organizations. Yeah. So in higher ed, the admissions department from one university definitely wants to make the other admissions department from the other university jealous, right? So there's that as well, because then you might be able to recruit. So it's also a recruiting tool. So that's, I think, one of the main, in terms of actual like business value reasons, recruiting. But also you could say that just being around to have like brain share also is important. So it's not just about, I have a presentation that I want to give. It's, I'm going to give a presentation, I'm going to spend 2 or 3 days talking with other people in my space, and I'm going to walk away with a lot of interesting ideas. So a lot of conferences, for example, will have a little page there that's like, convince your boss. It's a little like PDF download or something that says, here are the reasons why your boss should pay you to go to this event. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah. You mentioned we have to weed out because we find out that this is managed. So how do you usually take plans that change behavior so that we don't upset the
So the question is, if you have to let somebody go because they're a bad actor, or they're reflecting negativity or whatever, how do you manage that change within the culture? I've learned that everybody really knows. They might not have realized it, but they are likely to realize it in that moment when they hear that news. I've had all kinds of moments where we've had to let people go either for performance reasons or because they just did something really like weird and not aligned with our culture at all. Like, that's not cool. You shouldn't be doing that. Like, you need to go. In those situations, usually people they get it. Chances are they actually knew before you did, and they didn't say anything, or they didn't know how to say, or they didn't think it was like, I don't know if that really warrants me speaking up about whatever. But there was one instance, just as a case study, many years ago. The first person we ever had to let go for like HR reasons, meaning was doing weird stuff. This person wasn't working out. So very frustrating. Wasn't working out. So when we let him go, we still were all working in one office at that time, and we gathered everybody else into one of the conference rooms, and one group told all of them, and then a couple of us had to go let this person go. And once that person left the building, and everybody left the other conference room, and they had been given the news, they all kind of like swung by the break room and grabbed a beer, and soon we're all just hanging out and like having a good time. And that's when I realized, oh, everybody's happy. And everybody knew before I did. And, so usually like the team, again, you hire people that are smarter than better than you, like they're gonna know before you do. So in terms of managing change, just be respectful, first of all, always, and model the behavior that you would like. Treat the person that you're letting go the way you would want to be treated. Very golden rule type stuff. But people see that, and people react to it. So I would say that often there isn't as much change to manage as one might think. There's logistical stuff, like who's going to pick up the work, and then if this is a manager or something, then who's going to report to that person. But for the most part, if it is a toxic environment or a bad actor or something, people are probably actually going to be happy. Sure. John?
Just note that working remotely, there's having video communication that goes really long. We talked about having these kind of transient experiences. When you're talking to someone and having it kind of overloaded with analysis and perception, because if that's the only time you see someone during the day, it's like, and you're pissed off and you haven't shaved or whatever, and it's like, or you're just not paying attention. It's like, and that one moment is kind of overloaded, and that's one of the differences of working remotely versus working in the office. You see people on a regular basis, and you can kind of see this is like the cultural norms, and then you notice that with having so much sensory information, it would take an extreme event to notice, and that's like this is a fantastic presentation. I mean, I worked for you, but there's like these moments of like, oh shit, I screwed that up and that happened.
Oh well, okay. So to be fair, I mean, there's stuff in here that like I can't live up to on a daily basis. Like the reason why I sometimes shut off video, like I know that like the next call I'm going to have, I'm going to bring the baggage from the previous call into that, and I'm a ruminator, and I am very easily read. Like you can just look at me and know exactly like what I'm thinking about and like how I feel about that thing, and I know that everybody else in the team knows that. So sometimes I just have to like go away, because I'm going to be potentially the bad actor in the room, because I'm going to bring, and then they're going to wonder like, oh, was it something I did or whatever. So no, this is just for me as well. Like sometimes a laundry list of failures, but you have to like identify what you want to be to model the behavior that you want to create.
Okay, so this is kind of, I don't know about this question. If you're looking for a job, are there things that you can find out about a company in terms of things other than culture, which they can kind of lie about, or are there structural things, or how do you evaluate whether this is a culture you want to be a part of?
Yeah. So the question is, how do you decide, how can you figure out if the company that you're applying for or talking to actually has the kind of culture that you want to participate in? All kinds of things. So there are websites like Glassdoor where people review companies that they've worked for, theoretically that they've worked for. Glassdoor,
Okay.
Glassdoor.com. Please do, by the way, use this site and do write things that are accurate and truthful. I have heard, it hasn't happened to us, but I have heard stories of disgruntled people leaving and creating fake accounts and gaming that. That does happen. But so that's one way. Another way is to keep in mind that you are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. So you need to ask for certain things and demand certain pieces of information, nicely. But one thing that might be an interesting flag is, are they allowing you access to the people that you are likely to work with on a daily basis to have a conversation that is not monitored? right? That's something that in our recruiting process, we have multiple stages. There's sort of like there's a skills interview, there's a culture interview, and I forget, does Ilya sit in on the culture interview? I don't remember. So we want to have unmonitored conversations, and that benefits all parties actually, because then the person applying for the job isn't, they don't quite feel like, oh, there's the director of operations in the room, I need to, behave a certain way. They can just be themselves for a while. Likewise, they can ask really transparent, open-ended questions about, like, so what's it like working there, like, really? And we encourage everybody in the team to tell the truth, like, tell the stories that aren't so great, because people really do need to know what they're getting into. There's stuff that it really benefits everybody to find somebody who's really going to work out. And companies that don't realize that, and they just want to say, like, I need a systems engineer too, and check, like, that's maybe not the best culture. I don't know, maybe it works for you, but I'd say have access to the people that you would likely to be working with, or to have unfiltered conversations. That's another tactic.
In person, if it's feasible, like lunch interviews are actually fantastic. People college lunch and you actually get to sit with people from that company and have real conversations. Food makes people happy.
Thank you.
Richard, thank you. Yes, sir.
One comment, and it's a question about the atmosphere and the toxic network. All my years of training, the very best one I've ever had is crucial conversations. And
I heard of that.
it is empowering. It's probably the best thing I got out of it when I examine myself. When things get tough, I get quiet. I'm champion quiet. Is to recognize that and how to address things when things are tough. Emotions are high, stakes are high, opinions different. How do you address the person that offers verbal violence to this conversation and shuts other people down? I introduced my brother to this, and he was one of the first 10 employees in the construction company that's now $2 to $3 billion a year. Every employee in that company takes that. And it empowers them to know how to become a dialogue master, how to diffuse situations, how to not accept either or. It's either this or that. And it's to say, I wonder if there's a way we can do this and do that, get rid of that either. It gives you a lot of tools to recognize yourself, recognize other people, and to address those situations that are uncomfortable and how to get through so everybody can come out well. So that's a lot of jabbering to say, I really like that. It's like a $16 book. I was forced to go through the training, which is 4.5-day training where you really have to present examples, have a partner, talk it out, not go through my silent contemplating method of addressing it. So I recommend that for anybody that goes outside of those tough conversations. I deal with kids all the time. How do I get them to understand a different approach?
Cool. Thank you very much. Crucial conversations. Excellent. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you do during the culture interview and how you try to get to someone's culture without like something that comes with that.
Great. Here's the thing. I don't know. I don't know what's done during culture interviews. And I say that because all of that is handled by much more skilled people on our team. So they do whatever needs to be done to have a really great culture interview. So actually, I would have to ask people on our team, when you did your culture interview, what was that like?
Great.
It was fine.
It was like the last
Great.
one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was conversations about things like what do you do, interactions with community, like what do you do outside of work, and what wasn't like intrusive, but kind of like what do you find interesting, and a little bit between the lines is like are you engaged, like you have a strong open source culture that we're encouraged to participate in things like this. It's like in a greater context, like how do you relate to the world around you. It's not questions about pop culture or like do you also like Futurama, that kind of it's like, of course I do. Why you ask that? It's not that kind of culture. It's more like engagement and are you more than just this role?
Mm-hmm. that gets to the values over likability, right? Because like, do you like Futurama? Like, oh, we got something in common. Well, you're more likely to have stuff in common with people that are similar to you, right? But what you really want to dig at is the values, like what drives you, what motivates you. Do you do stuff in open source? If so, what are those projects? Like, what's the most interesting, book you've read recently, or what's the something that really made you stop and think in the last couple of weeks? Like, those are generally the kinds of things that we try to. Is there anything you want to add to that, Brian?
I can't really remember what we. I just remember having a conversation with two people that I would be working with. I don't remember what we said, or I don't know. It was more of just like, let's get to know each other and understand each other personally.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
One way I've done cultural reviews in my organization is we have a really, like, my employees have to do really crazy stuff, like get easy way getting things before. And so what I'll often do is, posit a scenario. Like, okay, so let's say that trees gets a bug up the butt about, building a JavaScript library in core. And it's your job to make that happen. How do you approach it? And what I'm looking for is people to say, well, first time you probably do a bunch of research into different JavaScript libraries, present those in a factual way to the community in a blog post or something like that. And then I would, hold a discussion, both online and multiple Drupal events to get people to. I'm looking for those kinds of things, and not like, oh, well, React is the best one, so we'll just use that. You know what I mean? It's like I'm looking for like the approach someone would use in solving a problem like that, more so than, I don't really care if they like Futurama or video games or this kind of thing, because we can work on that.
Yes, sir.
The university I work for, well, the department, the university that I used to work for, had a way of approaching a culture type interview when I was hired. You either went to lunch or dinner, or lunch or breakfast with two employees of the department off-site before your interview started. So I went to breakfast with probably, absolutely two of the quirkiest people in the department.
Oh, interesting.
So it was really interesting, and I stayed for the rest of the half-day interview. It worked out okay. I guess I've been there 20 years. But,
Yeah.
But it was a very casual discussion. I don't know. It's been 20 years. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but it was an opportunity to talk about the office and off-site, so it wasn't quite as formal.
Yep.
So we don't do that anymore with budgets, but I thought that was a nice approach to getting people in a more relaxed setting with just two regular employees. It wasn't managers there.
Mm-hmm. That the fact that you had to pick between lunch and breakfast reminds me of, because I think that those are very deliberate. There's I think a reason why dinner wasn't chosen. That's because dinner often involves drinking, especially in a setting like that. And this is a topic of conversation at Four Kitchens right now is making sure that you're creating opportunities for diversity. And alcohol is a thing, and in those settings, that's a thing that a lot of people do not want to be part of, whether it's for personal reasons or health reasons or religious reasons or whatever. But there are also, I don't have the numbers to back this up, I've just heard this, that one of the problems that a lot of software communities have is that there are these meetups that happen at bars at 5 or 6 o'clock. Well, who are you excluding? You're excluding a lot of parents that have kids that got to pick up from school. You're excluding a lot of generally women, not to generalize, this is what I've been told, because it's not the most comfortable atmosphere to be in, right? So we as a community and for interview purposes, right? If you're trying to do a culture interview, you want to pick an environment and a setting and a framework that is most welcoming to the most number of people. So I think it's a very deliberate decision to not choose dinner, because then it might exclude people who are like, but I got to go pick up kids, or I'm not really comfortable getting a drink with you, or whatever reason. So that's another thing that we tend to overlook that doesn't occur to a lot of people. I have no idea how much time I have left, by the way. Is it until 10:30? 10:30. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Yes.
So you mentioned what CPA did, and if they asked that question, what did you do?
Right. So for me, we did start documenting more stuff. So we really put an emphasis on like and we have since strayed away from this, or back to it. Document process and tools on like company wiki or something, and have a manual. Like there's a new initiative now, because it's been years since we really revisited this. We need to have like the manual that is like, here's how to be a web chef, here's how to run the company, right? Here are the tools we use, here's why, here's how we do sales, here's how we do marketing, here's all the things that we do. That I think we did that well many years ago, and we stopped doing that, and we need to get back to that. So documentation is one of the things that we did early on. The other is just really empowering people to be able to make decisions about certain things. And sometimes it's just as simple as, there was an example actually just this week where somebody who's in charge of content at our organization mentioned, hey, so I'm going through like some of the content on our website about personal bios. I haven't shared this with you yet. I've been going through some of the web pages about personal bios, and some people have families, and some people don't, and some people are gay, and some people are straight, and some people say partner, and some people say wife. And I think we need to kind of equalize all of that. We need to find certain things we want to mention in our bios and certain things that maybe we don't. And that way to create a more welcoming atmosphere for people who wouldn't necessarily feel excluded by saying like, wow, a lot of people here, a lot of guys say wife and kids, right, in their bios. So this has been kind of a talking point among some people who are handling content. And so I told this person, like, that's a really interesting point. It's up to you. And if you want to make this change, you have to explain it to the team. Because it's very easily something that I would have to get looped into, and then I have to write a whole explanation about like whatever, and then I'm going to have to field all these things about like, are we being too PC or like whatever, right? Well, this is something that person mentioned. They care about it. They have the data. They have the passion. It's yours. And what's interesting is like, by giving it to that person, they will gladly do it because they care about it. Whereas for me, it's kind of like, oh, okay, another hard conversation that I'm going to have with everybody, right? So I'm going to have to like muster all this energy and put that on my list of things, and I'll probably won't get to it for months. So stuff like that, like when somebody comes forward and they say, I want to do a thing, great, it's yours, right? And the flip side of that, of course, is like with good work, you are rewarded with more work. So you have to kind of be cognizant of that. If somebody's coming to you with a lot of good ideas, it's like, okay, you've got a lot on your plate. Like, let's throttle that, or let's hand it up to somebody else. But documentation saying, cool, do it, it's yours.
You're feeling when you document everything, like big manual, that people stop around that process. Oh, this is the way we do this, or
I don't know. That's a good point. I'd say that in my experience, nobody's ever fully happy with any of our processes or tools or anything anyway. So they're like, yeah, it says that, but I've got a better idea, So I haven't run into that specifically, but maybe that's true.
I've actually had some experience with that. It tends to scale with the organization. Small organizations can kind of feel that they can take more initiative for that sort of thing. If you look at the documentation, how, oh, hey, maybe we could do this. But the bigger and bigger the organization gets, the less likely people are to show documentation. So if you're a large organization, you always have to watch them, because eventually documentation can take this long.
I think that could be part of the requirements for a regular foreign person. Like once a month, just go to the and sort of an anomalous spirit in there.
Mm-hmm. And that might be, you could uncover that then in a question in the interview process. What if, let's say you're here for 3 months and there's some process that you don't like, what would you do? Just kind of leave it open-ended. If you find some kind of process or tool that you don't think is efficient, what do you do about it? Other questions? This has been enlightening and vigorous. Cool.
The technology that answers everything. And so when you hand somebody this massive PDF and say, here, manual, it's very set. You don't have it full time. If you've got a GitHub repo and you need 2 people to approve each change, or if you just got a wiki that get in there and modify, it opens it up a lot more. Maybe the sub-team making their own documentation, so you just feel more comfortable about it. I think there's ways to pull it together.
Yes. Yeah, those are the ones that tend to use large organizations and it has long.
Yes, sir.
How can we spread this gospel to other industries?
Boy, what do you have in mind?
Civil engineering.
Civil engineering. You seem very passionate about civil engineering and spreading it.